takes more than being online to be a great online university. It takes time and experience. University of New England pioneered distance education in the 1950s and has been perfecting it ever since. With features like 24/7 tutor access, we're now rated #1 for teaching quality and support, and the only public university in Australia to receive a 5-star rating 14 years running. So, for an expert online education, choose UNE.
Thank you, Julia, for agreeing to be interviewed for Law 499. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Certainly, Michael. My name is Julia Day, and I'm a senior lecturer in the law school at UNE with you. A little bit about myself. I primarily teach and research into areas such as tort law, medical law, and I'm increasingly becoming interested in social media law as well.
Oh, thank you, Julia. So let's ask the first question, which is, what do you see as the crucial legal issues with the developments or innovations in new technologies?
Okay, so I'm going to refer primarily to social media. Now, there are a number of issues that are coming to the fore in terms of social media and technology. One of the most interesting things about social media is that it's constantly changing. So one of the challenges I think the law is going to have is in terms of keeping up with the changes and the innovations in terms of social media. So I think, yeah, and you can see the other thing that's really relevant in terms of social media as well and technology is the fact that the power of social media. We're seeing that increasingly in a lot of different cases, but also just in our day-to-day lives. With the COVID-19 crisis, you can see that social media really has come to the fore, and the importance of social media has really come to the fore in this time as well.
Thank you. So my second question is a bit more specific. So some of the particular legal issues relating to, for example, to big data and artificial intelligence and social media. Can you give some case examples or some illustrations of some of the legal issues that are surrounding those technologies?
Okay, so I'll probably talk sort of more generally in terms of social media and the legal issues that are coming out. So the interesting thing is in terms of social media is that it permeates all of our different areas of law. You can see it's relevant to pretty much everything that we do on a day-to-day basis and relevant to all of the different areas of law. And certainly a really good example of how social media is relevant to law relates to defamation, for example. So there have been a number of really interesting current defamation cases come out. One was the Voller case from last year, which related to third-party comments on a commercial Facebook page. Now, the reason why that was so significant and important in terms of an area of law and how things have changed is because it hadn't previously been recognised as such that the publication of comments from a third party could actually mean that the business or the social media page owner, in that case it was media outlets, could actually be liable for those particular third party comments, or in that particular case it was more about whether or not it would constitute a publication. Liability wasn't really talked about. So you can see that it's becoming more and more important. As well, on 60 Minutes, a couple of weeks ago, there was a really interesting defamation case that was talked about in terms of a school principal. And again, you can see in that particular case that the school principal, Tracy Brose, she was actually, a lot of comments came from the students, the parents of students from her school, etc., about her. And she then sued those particular parents and others as well for defamation. Again, a fascinating case, only a fairly low jurisdiction, a district court decision, but a fascinating discussion, particularly in terms of the credibility of the principal, also the amount of people who saw the post as well. That also becomes very, very important in those sorts of cases. Aside from that, however, there are a number of other legal issues relating to social media, criminal law, for example. There are lots of issues in terms of things like revenge porn, and also, assault, harassment, etc. is relevant in terms of social media. You'll also see issues in terms of family law. So if there's a family law case, for example, people's social media pages are often looked at. Issues relating to discovery, etc. as well, and also looking at producing documents, etc. is again an issue relating to social media. And the list just goes on and on. In terms of, one of the things I'm interested in, because of course I've got a torts background, is vicarious liability and social media. Something that I think about a lot, because I, manage a lot of the social media accounts for the law school, for example. So as you would know from your studies in torts, it's all about the authorised acts, etc., etc. But the interesting thing about social media is that social media, it's hard to dissect people's private social media use and their social media use in terms of the workplace. So you can see in terms of employment law, etc., that there's more and more issues coming out in terms of that. For example, is it a case of unfair dismissal if somebody gets dismissed from saying something that's potentially defamatory on a social media page? Should there be a distinction made between if it was during work time as opposed to if it was outside of work? So there are just a raft of legal issues. And the interesting thing, of course, with social media is that because it hasn't been around for very long, really, we keep thinking, because it's such a huge part of most of our lives, it's really only been, in use for sort of less than 15 years. Of course, the law takes a long time to catch up to that. And so what's happening is that a lot of the laws and the cases are being used by analogy and looked at in the social media context. So this area of law is going to continue evolving, and there'll be significant changes, there's no doubt about that, and significant insights into how, into the regulation, etc., of social media.
Thanks, Julia. Before I move to my last question, you were mentioning the employment and the intersect between public and private life, work life, and your personal opinions. So I guess on the students' minds will be the Israel Folau case, because it has had such huge media reporting, as well as his actual tweet, etc. Now, did you see that as a torts lawyer as an employment case, where it's really about the terms of his employment, or did you see it more not so much as a defamation, but as a breach of community conduct? I'm not asking you to pass sort of merit on the actual what he said, etc., more the legal framework around it, because it has been such a high-profile case. I'm sure many of our students will have.
Yeah, of course. In terms of that, I would have definitely probably have seen it more as an employment law case. That seemed to be the key issues that were coming out in terms of the contract, etc., and what the terms of the contract were. But of course, with these issues, when you've got public figures, etc., that can be blurred as well. In terms of it's just being the terms of a contract, there can certainly be blurring of those lines. Yeah,
no, that one is, I guess, although they've settled with everything else going on with rugby and sport generally in the COVID-19, there's still many issues being played out. So thank you for that. So my last question is around, what do you think over the next 5 to 10 years, that sort of time frame, what are going to be the big issues, the big legal issues in technology going forward?
Okay, so the big legal issues, and again, I'm just referring to social media in this context. I think the big issues will be, first of all, the law keeping up with social media, because I think that social media, love it or hate it, is here to stay. I think for certainly the next 10 or 15 years. But what will happen, of course, and what has been continuing to happen, is that the platforms are continually changing. The way the platforms are used is continually changing as well. So I think that will be one of the key issues, is keeping up, the law keeping up with it. Other issues, of course, that I think will become more and more relevant, especially with our globalised world, is jurisdiction. So it's fairly well settled, and again, it's a sort of a pre-social media case with Gutnick in terms of jurisdiction. It's generally, for defamation anyway, it's where the damage to the defamation has happened. But it'll be really interesting to see, as the law evolved, how that changes as well, because our legal system and our globalised legal system is different, of course, and very, very complex. So I think that will be another very interesting area. The other thing I think that will be fascinating in terms of social media in the next 10 to 15 years is you're increasingly seeing social media being used for commercial enterprises. You can see that all the time, and that's certainly been looked at on something like Facebook, where Mark Zuckerberg, of course, has tried to change the algorithm on many occasions to try and keep the commercial social media pages off, to make sure that it doesn't lose its credibility and its interest in terms of the personal interaction, which, of course, what social media is trying to do. They're trying to create a community of people rather than just trying to sell people things. So I think that commercial enterprise will become very important. That was certainly discussed in cases like the Voller case, which talked about the importance of a commercial enterprise, and the fact that people are actually, and you can see this is from a tortious point of view, is often discussed. When people are making money out of using something, then their liability often increases as well, because they're getting something out of it as well. It's not just being used as a touchy-feely device like the Julia Day Facebook page, which is touchy-feely and nice. Well, maybe, hopefully nice. But I think they're going to, and the other thing that's going to become more and more interesting as well relates to fake news as well. I think that's going to become more and more important as people, because what's happening, on one way it's fabulous. We're democratising our dialogue and our community conversation, etc. But on the other hand, it's a problem, because people are relying on fake news. They're relying on communications which haven't been verified, as they previously would have been under law of the structured, regulated media outlets. So I think, there's going to be huge amounts of changes and huge amounts of issues, but I think they are just some of them, and it'll be really interesting, as I said, to see if there's going to be any further regulation put onto social media. The other issue, of course, that'll be interesting to see what happens is in terms of privacy. I think that with our social media platforms, most people have willingly given up privacy, without really thinking about it. And it'll be interesting to see with the new generation who their whole lives they've been subject or had social media in their lives, to see whether or not they question those sorts of issues more. So I think it's going to be really fascinating times, and really there'll be significant changes and an evolution.
Oh, thank you, Julia, for your insights. I completely agree. I think you've hit the nail on the head. After what people like Cambridge Analytica did for a Facebook in terms of fake news and the verification, etc., that's going to be a huge part of the future. Thank you very much for your time and your insights today.
Thank you, Michael.